If you're a sales leader, the least effective thing you can do in high pressure situations is say something like, what are you going to sell? I need you to sell more. We need to hit our figure. I just sell more. That is the least helpful response. If you're a leader, you need to lead alongside your team often. And that includes showing your team that you can pick up the phone and call that banker. You can send the email, do the LinkedIn connection request, but it's your time to get into the trenches with them and not assume that duty no longer applies to you.
Stacy Bishop, thank you for coming on the podcast. You are a fintech sales strategist specializing in helping fintech founders effectively sell to banks and financial institutions without falling into common sales pitfalls. Your approach merges deep banking industry knowledge, practical sales experience, and an emphasis on strategic positioning to help startups move from chaos to closed revenue. You bring unique insights from both the fintech sales leader and living in a household immersed in banking and embedded finance discussions. Some of your background involves spending 23 years, almost a quarter of a century, at Jack Henry, transitioning from frontline roles to high-level sales leadership. What was your biggest takeaway from navigating such diverse roles within one organization?
Ooh, I have to tell you, I think every role focused on serving bankers. So that is such a huge part of my DNA, speaking to bankers, serving banks and users. And as I think through those roles, the tactics and the strategies changed quite a bit. That overarching mission did not, and it has followed me outside of the company. But I would say some learnings that I took. I began my career at Jack Henry on the customer education side. So teaching community bankers how to use one of the Jack Henry core systems. And that was exciting. Fresh out of college, fresh out of being a community banker myself, teaching people how to use a software I believed in. However, I will tell you, if anyone has ever made the journey from education into selling, a pitfall I encountered, a challenge, was thinking that everyone cared about every parameter, about every little subtle nuance that I had shoved into my head over the course of my customer education career when trying to sell was a huge just awakening for me. I learned that in order to sell, we had to focus more primarily on the audience, their problems, and if there were 2 or 3 little nuggets of features and functions to highlight in a solution to meet those versus let me tell you everything I know about everything I know was a big transition and not one that I immediately found success in. So it took me a while to get my bearings there. And I think once I had that motion down in selling, some of the leadership components that came after that were simply more, the challenge there was just reinforcing those same learnings to people that were coming up on this journey themselves and learning in that regard. So I hope I answered your question there. Happy to go on a little bit further if needed.
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question to that. You mentioned your initial career challenge being a female revenue leader, underestimated due to family assumptions. How did that experience shape your leadership style today?
I will tell you, that was, if what I mentioned previously was eye-opening, that was somewhat demoralizing. Being a successful seller, a successful person, and then finding out later in life by having kids that certain components were now being closed off to me, certain paths. It was demoralizing and unexpected in the modern age. I think that absolutely one of the ways it shaped me is learning that people have multiple avenues in front of them and to never assume anything about individuals or their situations. So to say this another way and to say it more directly, as a female sales leader, older, having young kids, I'm sure that caught a lot of people by surprise. Don't just expect that my husband and I, don't have other alternatives, perhaps like that we're evaluating, nannies or other components. And as such, I now find that while I'm not perfect, I find that when it comes to interacting with individuals that I lead, I never assume that I know anyone's situation. I never assume that, I have the answers. I ask the questions, I present the alternatives, and then let those individuals truly evaluate whether they know in their situation a role could be a fit. I hope I've answered that for you.
Stacey, I want to go back to what you were saying about transitioning from education into sales. So my background is in sales, my whole career has been, and I've done sales training and coaching for the last 7 or so years. And initially I was selling education. So there was a blend there. And it was financial education for the retail public, which I was fascinated by and I was learning lots of. And I fell into the same trap of, I want to explain everything to you. I want to teach it to you. I want to tell you everything that's in my brain. And sure, some people love that. Most don't. And what I learn, as I now help others, and I'm sure you do as well, is that the types of people that are making decisions, usually at the top of the hierarchy, are not necessarily the people that want the detail. So how do you help, especially within fintech, which I would imagine fintech founders are more likely to be the analytical types or the detail oriented people? How do you help them simplify their pitch and simplify their message for their audience?
Oh, it's such an interesting question, and it's one that comes with a lot of caveats and learnings, and a bit of shared humility on my part and theirs. So I will say fintech founders themselves, especially very technical ones that I tend to work with, they are absolutely intelligent people. They wouldn't be, they couldn't be, they likely couldn't have started a company without that level of intelligence. And sometimes getting that to translate into a compelling type of sales narrative doesn't come easily. And perhaps nor should it. They haven't had the experience, Becky, that you and I have had then in our careers and growing up in that fashion. So I think for such individuals, just helping them understand the concept of speaking to individuals above the line and below the line, as we often refer to it in revenue. I see you both kind of shaking your head and nodding. People with this C-level title are going to have different types of cares and concerns versus those that may actually enact a solution that we refer to obviously as below the line. So I think it's more of a training and a coaching in that when you are demonstrating and you are presenting or you're having any sales type of motion, keep in mind who's in the audience. Always tailor first to objectives for the organization, focusing on, in my case, speaking to bankers, so growing deposits, speaking to bankers about juicing their non-interest income totals or attracting younger end users or keeping money in the bank instead of bleeding out to other fintech type of banks. Those are the things that get their attention versus individuals that might be in the below the line category, still important, but we know it's a different message. We know for those individuals, it's about creating more operational efficiency in their day-to-day lives. It's about helping them better serve the end user. It's about honestly putting them at peace of mind for knowing that they're up for the next promotion because they've selected a solution that is just going to do amazing things for the organization.
You mentioned serving the end user. How can founders differentiate their fintech product effectively without relying heavily on discounts or overly aggressive sales tactics?
Man, I will tell you, David, this one I always come back to the basics on. I think that's where we have to start. And so for me, when I'm speaking with founders, it is ensuring that you have a solid offer. And I know people likely get sick of me talking about this, people that I consult with, but just looking at how your product is different than the rest of the industry. And let me give you a case in point. In FinTech, there's a number of solutions that are competitive in nature. So loan origination systems, digital banking systems, know your customer, know your business type solutions. These are very competitive spaces. And in order to differentiate your offering from other providers, you have to have a solid understanding of what the problems are and how you solution for those problems, and then how you package them. And I think sometimes fintech founders forget about ensuring that that banker they're sitting across from in a virtual meeting or in an on-site meeting understands that they can make the solution a low lift, or that they will offer education to the frontline members. Because I'm sure each of you know in your own careers, people are always looking for the reason to discount us when they are, and I don't mean discount dollars and cents, I mean say no to us. I am saying they're looking for the reason to say no. When you think through all of those no's and you craft the path forward with yeses, it becomes a much more fun conversation. So I would say start first with your offer. Make sure your demo is not feature function oriented. And I think growing up as a presenter, first and foremost, where I spent 9 years pitching to banks across the US, 3 to 5 city states every week. I spent some time across America chatting with bankers, and I have done a lot of things well. I have fallen on my face a lot of times when it comes to demos as well. I have the scars to prove it. But I think the most exciting conversations, the most engaging conversations, they were not where I was feature dumping or just pitching functionality. It was starting with, and this might sound trite, but starting with a challenge that a banker has, maybe they know about, even better if they don't. And we can use a challenger type of sales methodology to point them uniquely towards our solution. So nail your offer, create an impactful presentation. And then the 2 other tips I would give you that I always keep top of mind: make certain that as a fintech founder, you're guiding the conversation. Individuals that sell that may not have had the selling background that we all have in the revenue space, I often hear them say something like, well, would you like to think about this and talk about it internally and get back to me? That's not a next step. That is just an invitation for them to put a pause on the conversation. Instead, it's so much more compelling to say, now at this stage of the discussion, our next step is to do this. And we would like to go ahead. If you think that there's value in this conversation and us continuing the conversation, why don't we go ahead and find a time in the next week or 2 to continue the discussion? And you can joke with people about, the seller coming out and you wanting to book the next meeting from this meeting, but make sure you do it, because bankers have, in my space, way more to do than just sitting around talking about your solution and the 5 other alternatives that exist for it. So showcase your professionalism and authority. And lastly, just make sure that you're proving value each step of the way, so that when you get to those negotiation stages, it's not a 60 to 70% haircut off the top of the price. Start with the fundamentals. And if you still find you're discounting heavily, then we need to look at other stages in your sales process first. But start with those pieces.
That very last thing that you said about, if you're finding yourself discounting a lot, there's probably something happening beforehand we need to look at. I'm not sure if you find this, but loads of people say to me, I'm great at everything, it's just the close. I struggle with the close. And nearly always, it's not the close that's the problem. It's what's come before that. Part of the thing that you said there around value, that if people are trying to discount, that would suggest, if the potential buyer is trying to discount, that would suggest they don't see value, which means the conversation has not gone the right way, where we've uncovered the value that they see, whatever challenge they might be facing, how it might be solved. For people that are not, let's say, natural salespeople, and I have potentially a little issue with that. I think it can be a learned skill, but for people that don't have that natural, say, confidence maybe to challenge or to ask questions that might be uncomfortable, how do you support people to become more comfortable doing that kind of thing?
It's a fair question. I, like you, Becky, think that sales can be a learned skill. It may be uncomfortable to learn, but it can be learned. I think we've all been there. While some people might be a bit more charismatic or outgoing or extroverted, I have seen extremely successful people that have more introverted skill set, but are effective at driving the conversation forward. And I think sometimes those individuals might even be better equipped to ask the hard questions or the uncomfortable questions surrounding value. But I think that we as sellers or people that are learning this skill almost need to train ourselves at each step to ask for validation that what we've said resonates, and let's just not assume that the dots have been connected. And this is something that I think quite a bit about these days in my role in speaking with the fintechs that I partner with these days, because I think it's very easy to assume that passion for a product or an offering or a good founding story equates to a banker saying, oh, yes, I have this problem. Oh, yes, this solution can solve it for me. And here's how. Those dots are not always connected. And I think at each stage of the process, I encourage people that are selling to connect those dots and validate that the dots are connected by asking a series of questions. And they don't have to be scripted. They can be as simple as, what resonated with you most about our discussion today? Do you think, knowing what you know and what we've discussed, is there value on us taking the next step? If the answer is no, I appreciate it. Why do you feel that way? These can be uncomfortable questions, but when you're a fintech founder, these are the questions that become the lifeblood of your product. And you have to take that feedback and use it to make either the product better or the sales process better. So I hope that, again, roundabout answer perhaps to your question, but I think it's each step of the process, just asking the question, what's the worst that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is what they don't answer you. That has not been my experience ever. Most people will provide you with not sure that there's a reason for us to speak further, or yeah, I think there's value. And the next question is, why do you think that? What did you see? Try to get that value, try to get those little micro agreements so that when you get to that negotiation phase, you can remind those people.
Do you have any examples of someone that received that feedback and was able to successfully implement it and what that outcome was like?
Yeah, probably. I think that the individuals that I think more of are those that I had direct leadership oversight into. There was a gentleman that I hired that had worked previously at a credit union. Very successful working at a credit union. And in this example, he came and worked for me at a large core company, so at Jack Henry. And very engaging and charismatic, and just perhaps wasn't asking these questions to cement those steps moving forward. And so, as it perhaps wasn't the only coaching that was offered, but it was a specific one that was offered just to ask the questions, gain agreement, discuss the next steps, ensure that there's agreement, just keep those agreements moving. And this individual was able to not only meet his quota, but blow away his quota and earn President's Club the last 2 years, at least, that I was there at the company. So not any completely his own efforts, perhaps with just a little minimal guidance from my part. He's a talented seller.
I think it sometimes is. It's the smallest things. It's encouragement in a certain area, a soundbite or a question that they can ask. That once they start to implement it, they see a huge difference. One of my clients started to say at the start of his sales conversations, he said, "I'd like us to discuss first any blockers to working together." And that was a great way to frame the rest of the conversation. You mentioned earlier that people are finding reasons to discount, to say no. We might as well know what they are before we can then go towards the yes. I find for some people that can be quite a mindset shift because they think sales is product vomit. Let me tell you all about this product and let me tell you how it works and let me tell you all the tech. How do you help people with that mindset shift?
I always like to think of sales as a completely different than the traditional movies we see. You all know the movies, the Glengarrys, the Wolf of Wall Street, the ones where people feel like they have to convince others. And that, I think, when I first moved into sales, was a bit of a mind trap for me because I'm a girl from the Midwest. I was trained and raised to be nice and accommodating to individuals, and trying to convince people beyond my speech and debate in high school, to do something or to think something was not a concept I was comfortable with at all. And I think as I got a bit deeper into my career and I started watching the most successful reps at my company sell and speaking with them and asking questions, I learned that it wasn't about convincing people to do anything. It was about helping people to purchase something that would solve a problem they have. And if it's not us, somebody else is going to help them solve it. And that's okay too. A no is okay. What's not okay is not having the discussion and giving someone the right to hear that you can help them. So that type of a shift for me personally was something that I always tried to impart to others that I would mentor, especially working at a large logo and other companies. I mentored quite a few individuals that were interested in sales, especially in the potential towards their paycheck. But they also have this belief that they had to convince and that they just weren't confident in themselves to do so. Changing the narrative and reframing it as helping people buy to facilitate and alleviate a problem is just a much more comfortable story, Becky, at least for me.
Why is banking as a service such a compelling trend for community banks and credit unions? And how can fintech founders leverage this effectively?
Oh, now you're getting into a passion of mine. So not only am I married to a bank executive, my husband is also a BaaS banker. And what that means is his bank. So while I am a fintech seller selling to banks, he is a banker selling to fintechs. And what he's selling, banking services like being able to process payments, open accounts, things of the like, embedding those into fintech offerings. And I think that BaaS, and I realize I'm a bit biased. I'm trying not to be, but BaaS, I see it as a way for community banks, especially, to remain relevant. And therefore, fintechs are in the future, my hope is that most community bankers will not view them as competitors, but view them as a necessary partner to their relevance. And here's why. For those that might not be as familiar with that BaaS term, I alluded to the fact that it's embedding some traditional banking services and features like transaction processing, account opening in a fintech. It's like swiping your Starbucks card or putting money on that card. Starbucks is not a bank. They're not holding your funds. They are working with what's called a sponsor bank. And I think as we, end users, that use these apps or that are loyal to companies, as we continue to enjoy that experience, more and more, we're going to continue to see more and more fintechs offering those types of payment rails, those types of elements within their tool. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want to go onto my banking app to digital banking and purchase and pay for coffee out there. I want to do that in store, in app, from my phone, or from a Starbucks or favorite coffee shop card. So I think the environment is driving banking as a service. I know that there are a huge number of fintechs, at least here in the US, that are looking and hunting for sponsor banks, but there's a fraction. We have a supply issue right now in the States where not a lot of banks have embraced banking as a service. And in fact, I don't know if you both realize this, but I've just kind of launched today, in fact, an educational element where I'm educating community bankers about this whole BaaS service. Nothing for them to purchase or buy. First time in my career, I've spoken with bankers about not purchasing something, but it's more about letting them know there's a huge opportunity, there's a need, and this is an easy way for them to grow deposits, to grow their net interest income fields, for them to increase their brand presence. Why do I know? I've seen my husband's bank do it, and I've seen them and others be extremely successful at it.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because it sounds like you're working a lot with founders, and usually let's take a salesperson that works for an organization. Worst comes to worst, if they don't hit their quota this month, maybe they don't get their commission. For a founder, there's a lot more on their shoulders as to getting their foot in the door. And if that doesn't work, they've got investors on their back, they've got salaries to pay. How do you necessarily mentor maybe founders through, when do they outsource this to salespeople? When do they do it themselves? Where's the right balance there?
For me, the answer is always rooted in the unit economics. And I don't know if either of you have heard of the Pavilion community. It's a revenue community here, at least in the States, that I've been a member of that for several years when I'm still working for a large logo. And that was one of the elements that I learned early on. It's about unit economics, and it has served me so well moving into the fintech space and now working with founders, because I suspect, Becky, that there's many founders that go the path of, let's hire a CRO, let's hire a VP of sales, let's hire BDRs and start blanketing the banking space with emails and phone calls and all of these things that do nothing more than just cause your burn rate to accelerate. When in fact, I feel strongly that we first need to ensure we have product market fit and go to market fit before we start throwing salespeople at a problem. Now, with product market fit, let's start having conversations with, in my case, bankers. Does the problem we're solving resonate? Does the solution we're offering resonate? Can we facilitate your need with the minimum viable product? What else do we need in order to make it effective? All questions that are super important. And I think once we have that and the positioning and the price point, we then start with our go-to-market fit and ensuring, again, in my space, do we target the big banks? Do we target the mid-sized banks? Do we target the mid-sized banks that are using a certain core system or tech stack or in this geography? So ensuring then that we have that go-to-market fit. And once those two elements are solid and the unit economics fit, and by that I'm really referring to, let's look at our CAC and our LTV to CAC to make sure they're in bounds. Because if they're not, throwing people at a problem, even outsourced people, are not going to fix the solution. So I'm a broken record. Let's do the fundamentals right. Let's get PMF. Let's get GTM fit. And while we're still muddling through those times, spend your money on marketing, spend your money on awareness and education first. Sales can come after that, is my opinion, for what it's worth.
Makes sense to build the foundations of a house first before you get the plaster in. Absolutely.
So true. So true. So that you're not laying off those salespeople later. That's demoralizing for all involved.
How do you effectively motivate a sales team to consistently exceed expectations without causing burnout, especially in high pressure environments like the one we're discussing?
Yeah, I think that first of all, letting everyone know the goals and what we're shooting for and the challenges to overcome. All of those can be rallying cries if handled well. And that seems very basic, I get it, but the larger the organization, sometimes the less transparency or visibility you have. I know this specifically from my past. There might be a big number shared and maybe even a team or individual number, but that's about it. I find it much more impactful if you're having discussions with people as adults that are going to be shooting for these goals themselves and helping the team come together. So I think being transparent with, here's the goal, here's how we fit in with the overarching figures, here are the headwinds we have. How do we solution for those headwinds? Let's talk about this as a team or about your ideas. I'll share some ideas I have after I hear yours first. And let's be open to experimenting. Because the worst thing we can do in sales, I think, or I feel at least, is believing we have it all figured out when the market changes so frequently and experimentation is so vital and is so needed. So I think it starts first with the transparency and the visibility. And then, I mean, who doesn't like a good, goofy contest or spiffs or campaigns that keep people driving towards the behavior you wish to see? And sometimes the goofier the better. Sometimes where if you can put the head of from somebody's picture on a cartoon body and them doing a dog race like the Iditarod and just trying to hit goals and goalposts, that kind of thing goes a long way just towards team morale and ensuring that you're all on the same page. And the last thing I would mention, David, is if you're a sales leader, the least effective thing you can do in high pressure situations is say something like, what are you going to sell? Or I need you to sell more. That's one of my favorites. I need you to sell more. We need to hit our figure. I just sell more. That is the least helpful response. If you're a leader, you need to lead alongside your team often. And that includes you picking up the phone to make phone calls out to bank executives in your network, or just leading by example, showing your team that you can pick up the phone and call that banker. You can send the email, do the LinkedIn connection request, but it's your time to get into the trenches with them and not assume that duty no longer applies to you.
You mentioned, Stacey, about the ever-changing market and how quickly it changes. And I would imagine, especially in fintech, because you've got regulatory changes as well as technological changes to be on top of. What trends do you see in the next maybe few years that might significantly impact the way founders of fintech companies and banks might interact with each other, or how business might be done in that space?
There's a couple, Becky, that just pop to mind right now. The first of which is what we here in the States refer to as like 1033 or open banking formats. And it's open banking. Traditionally, the US, this may not be a popular thing to say, but I don't believe we're slower to adopt technologies and sometimes concepts than our counterparts in Europe, like your environment there, Becky, and even in Canada, David. I think you guys led us as well for quite some time in banking as a service, and I think that open banking has been a lofty goal for many core providers, and definitely every fintech's wanted it, but it takes work. It takes work to create either a middleware layer or API connectivity that allows these core systems to connect to fintechs and therefore allow banks to play with whomever they want, and have whatever type of strategy they want. So that is, I think that is one we absolutely have to watch, is around open banking. The other one is more of a CFPB type of initiative, and it's forgive me, the official name is going to escape my mind, but it's the concept that people should be able to easily unenroll for an app just as easily and quickly as they can enroll in the app. And this is pertinent in banking because we now see digital banking providers giving this ecosystem and this marketplace. I know personally, I had worked with a company previously that made it very easy to enroll in their solution. But if you wanted to unenroll or cancel a subscription, it required an email or a phone call to that business because they wanted a chance to earn back your business. Those rules have changed now. And now we need to be able to allow a customer to easily cancel their subscription. And that's just the way it should be. Everything should be done in app without requiring that type of lift on a customer.
What's your methodology for defining an ideal serviceable, attainable market or SOM for fintech startups? And why do you consider this crucial to success?
Well, if we look at just the space in the States here, 9,700 FIs, that includes banks and credit unions. So that would be, for most organizations, most fintechs, David, their TAM. But we find that not all solutions play well in both markets. And if they do play well in both markets, banking and credit unions are so very, very different that the organization size might come into play, which tends to affect then your SAM. So the TAM at the top, your total addressable market, your SAM, you kind of start to filter down a bit. I realize I'm pontificating to you both, and you already know this, as do I'm sure so many of the viewers, but the TAM we further narrowed down, the SAM, or service addressable market. And then who we think we can actually go after, the SOM there. And those are individuals that, so to put a fine point on it, maybe too fine of a point, 9,700 FIs, perhaps we want to go after smaller community banks and credit unions that are, when I say smaller, let's say they're $500 million in asset and below. And then we further want to narrow down and to focus first on a couple of integrations we've built. So thinking through my past, maybe it's Jack Henry and Banno Digital Banking and Q2 Digital Banking. So we further narrow down and to get down to our SOM, our service obtainable market, what we think we can actually go after. This is where all of our revenue projections should be for our investors. This is where we need to be focused on in that area, and it's absolutely imperative that we do so. We may get outliers from up here or up here. Fantastic. Don't build a business model around those. Build a business model based upon your ICP until you know you have that product market and go to market fit, then explore the other verticals and go for those other outliers.
So thinking into the future, what's the vision that you have for this space, and what input or impact would you personally like to have in this space in the future?
I envision a future in which traditional community bankers view fintechs more as partners, because I realize I mentioned this a bit earlier, Becky, but there's still this mentality in traditional bankers that fintechs are competitors. And in some ways they are. There are fintech banks that just have a digital footprint that might use a sponsor bank. But for the vast majority of the companies that I work with, they are looking to partner with FIs and to help them better serve their end users, whether that's through a more compelling loan origination system, a better reg tech stack, a better flavor of rewards offerings, you name it. They are seeking to partner within typically digital banking and provide a better customer experience in that digital banking ecosystem. So for me, I think if I look at it from the lens of a traditional bank, I would envision a time in which each bank or credit union has an ecosystem. And I hate to overuse that term, we overuse it in fintech, but this environment, this hub, if you will, where people, anything relative to their financial picture can be accessed or accommodated by their primary financial institution, bank or credit union alike. And while they may have specialty apps here and there, they all integrate back to the financial environment, making it easier for all of us. Now, from the fintech's point of view, hitting back on a question that David asked earlier, BaaS is not something we can afford to ignore. The market potential is huge. We see it in EMEA. We see it just across Europe right now. We cannot ignore that potential, both the market potential and the revenue that fintechs are going to drive for financial institutions. So I think in a nutshell, it's time that traditional bankers just open up their arms, embrace fintechs, and understand that we're all here to drive money for each other and to better serve the end user. And I think as far as the way I can help, a lot of it is for the BaaS bank, for the traditional community bankers, teaching them about BaaS. Married to a BaaS banker, I'm passionate about it. I live it and talk about it daily. And then as well for the fintech founders, I'm a multifaceted person. So for the fintech founders, I just want them to have their shot. And when they get that shot in front of a banker, I want them to take it and nail it and then sell their solution, at least sell the idea effectively so they can be confident and they can be repeatable in a selling motion. So those are I guess my dreams, if you will, my dreams and hopes for the industry and then the way I can serve in the industry.
We've got some rapid fire questions for you here. What's the best piece of sales advice you've ever received in 5 words or less?
5 words or less.
Don't worry too much about the count there.
Okay. when you hear yes, stop selling. So that's not exactly 5 words.
I could have used that.
Right? Me too.
What's your go-to motivational mantra before a big sales pitch?
Oh, before a big sales pitch. Ooh, can I come back to this one? Let me think about this one, David.
I don't know if the next one's going to be much easier for you. With your household's finance-centric conversations, who usually wins debates, you or your spouse?
Ooh. I will say probably him more so, only because I am a very, I would tell you, I'm going to say evolved, but I've read Adam Grant's book, Rethink, and I try to rethink my positions on things a little bit more so than maybe perhaps my husband. So
I do too, but I also am trying to address a people-pleasing tendency, and I get kind of confused at the Venn diagram there between empathy and rethinking like someone else's perspective and not standing up for maybe some healthy adversity.
That's a good point. I will say I grew up thinking that everything my opinions were solid. My opinions were the correct ones. I think it's because I grew up in a very great Midwestern family. My dad was, we would say, a little hard-headed, if you will. I inherited that tendency, and I used to shove to win arguments, and the only person that felt better about it was me at the end of the conversation. So I think the rethinking for me, I just try to determine, is this conversation gonna matter in a year from now? I don't know. Maybe it's just something that I sit back and say, that's an interesting thought. Let me think about it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing a slice of your impressive experience with us. Where can people follow you and get in touch with you?
Yes, I'm out on LinkedIn. My name is Stacy. My parents were a little boring, so I'm just a CY. So Stacy Bishop. My company is Selling FinTech. I have company pages coming, websites launching this month in March. So you'll also be able to find me just a broader search. But LinkedIn is likely the best way. Those are the areas in which I try to convey thoughts and advice and tips for FinTech founders.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Becky, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
It's been a great conversation, Stacey. So thank you. It's nice to use the LinkedIn word synergy in the way that we view sales. It's sometimes come across people that kind of like the conversation on rethink, that might think of sales as more traditional. Be passionate, tell them it's going to be amazing, sell them on the dream, just keep pushing. And whilst that can sometimes work out, I find it a little bit harder to navigate those conversations. So it's great to meet with people like you that see it in a similar way and have seen success, created success, and helped other people do that too.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much, Becky.